Hi everyone, it's Sherry from Sharecroppers, and I'm coming to you a little bit later today for our weekly free online card class. And this week we are using the Simply Succulents stamp set and potted succulents dies. So I have 3 cards that I'm going to share with you today, and these are a little bit uncharacteristic for me because there's only one tiny piece of designer series paper. And if you have ever stamped with me, you know that my cards are based on designer series paper with a few little bits of stamping thrown in. So this is a stretch for me, but it is a great stretch. And I'm hoping that you will be able to even if you don't have this bundle, I hope that you'll be able to take the ideas that I'm sharing with you today to create some beautiful cards with me. I just want to call this video up on my laptop here so that way I can see your comments. It's a little tricky for me to see on my phone, so we'll just get this video going up here on the laptop, and that way you can ask questions as the class goes on. I think this class will be about 90 minutes. That's what we usually run, and we get all 3 cards done in that time, plus lots of tips as well. So let's just get that refreshed here. I think we've got it. Okay, perfect. Make sure you say hello if you are joining me on here. Hi, Kathy. Hello. I see Karen is on here and Joyce. I'm so glad that you're here. Now it's jumping around a little bit on my computer, so I hope that it's a better connection for you. Hopefully it will last us for the entire class. So if you're just joining us, we're using Simply Succulents and the potted succulents dies that coordinate, and those are from our annual catalog. We're going to be making 3 cards that all use different techniques. So some different coloring techniques, some different stamping techniques, and we're modifying a layout that I used in yesterday's Inky Fingers class. So if you were part of that, I think we had 7 people all together that came. You will recognize the layout, but you'll be able to see it used in an entirely different way. So it's a good way to case yourself when you do create a card. Go ahead and change up the backgrounds, the stamp set, and it will be a completely different card. We're actually going to start with that card today, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to make this beautiful background and this card as well using a die that's included with the potted succulents die. So it's one of these really intricate background dies, and we're going to use part of it on a card. But before we do that, we'll use it as a stencil and get that really pretty brushed background. All right, so if you're stamping, let me know what stamp set and bundle you're using. If you're using the succulents, great. If not, make sure you let us know what you are creating with. All right, so I'll set these other 2 cards aside, and we're going to start with this one. This is just a simple note card. It doesn't have any crazy techniques, but I used the focal point stamp in a different way on this, and I thought it would be really nice to show how you can use this large stamp set to create a subtle, almost like a border print on there. So let me grab a piece of grid paper so that way I'm not stamping here on my surface, and we will get started. If you're stamping with me, we're going to be using this large stamp, this large succulent stamp. And I'm going to be stamping first on soft seafoam, and it's a tone on tone. So we'll use soft seafoam cardstock and soft seafoam ink, okay? And actually, instead of grid paper, what I've been using today here at the studio is the little foam grid that goes with my Stamparatus. And I like this because when I use my blending brushes, I could wipe it right off. So if you have one of these, you might want to pull it out. I'm going to use the Stamparatus when I do my inking as well, but it's not necessary. So let's set our card over to the side and we'll start our stamping. So when I ink this stamp up, I'm only going to be stamping on the bottom half of this piece. This piece is 3 inches by 3 inches. And you can use whatever light green cardstock and ink you chose. This one had a lot of flexibility in it. And we'll stamp that right across the bottom half. So it'll be kind of rounded up a little bit, but that's okay. It's really just to get that subtle border. There. And actually, while I have this out, we'll grab a scrap. So we have that border, and this will kind of blend a little bit as we let it dry. I can already see that it is starting to get more detailed there. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. We're also going to stamp this small succulent on a scrap of soft seafoam while we have our ink out. Now we have dies that will cut these small succulents out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to cut out one of these larger aloe die cuts. This is not stamped. There's not a coordinating stamp for that. Instead, it's more of a supporting die so that you can get all of those nice succulents there. So I'm just going to die cut this off camera. And if you're stamping along with me, you can do that as well. And I'll also die cut my aloe. The dies in this bundle are pretty amazing. There are detailed ones, there are ones that cut out the images, there are some really beautiful labels that we're going to use as well. Okay, so I'll set these aside now until we're ready for them. And now we're going to go ahead and start assembling some of these layers. So the next thing that I'm going to do is mat this stamped square with a larger piece of crumb cake. So our square is 3 by 3. So the mat that I'm going to put it on is 3 1/8 by 3 1/8. Hi, Leslie, how are you? Your daffodil kits are headed out in the mail, so be watching for those. Those should be there early next week. Hello, Patricia. Make sure you say hello and let me know where you are from. We always have lots of new names and faces on here, and I don't always know where you're from. Okay, so we have that layer assembled. We'll just set that aside. Now, in the cutting dimensions, I gave you a couple of options for this next piece. I gave you cutting dimensions for the designer series paper, but I said that if you didn't want to use designer series paper, or if you didn't have something that was tone on tone that would work, you could also just use a piece of cardstock in the same color as your frame. So I used soft succulent for that scalloped rectangle, and I'm using soft succulent designer series paper from the Basics 6x6 pack. But if you don't have that, you could just cut a piece of cardstock that's the same color and do a tone on tone stamping. And that just means that you would be using a stamp with the same color ink. So it's a little bit tricky to see. You'll see this more on the next card that we do, but I did some tone-on-tone stamping here where I just used my succulents and stamped with soft succulent ink on soft succulent cardstock. And that would look great there as well. But I decided to pull in just a little bit of designer series paper. This pattern reminded me of a trellis, so I liked that. The designer series paper is 2.5 inches wide by 3 3/4 long. That will fit perfectly inside the stitching here. And we'll just use flat adhesive to glue that in. Okay, and now we'll set that aside and we'll work on our card base. This card base is crumb cake, but you could use any neutral. And then this piece right here, this white cardstock layer, I've embossed that with the Tasteful Textile 3D embossing folder. That is completely optional, but I thought that it just gave it a little bit of interest there without competing with any of the other design elements there. That is one of my most used folders. So if you have any kind of subtle embossing folder, it just breaks it up a little bit. So I'm going to get my card base in here, and I'm also going to quickly emboss this layer with the Tasteful Textile embossing folder. Remember, I do all of this with you on camera, so that gives you a chance to also do this along with me. On Wednesdays when I do my fun folds, that's very fast paced and it's really hard to keep up. With this one though, I don't have things pre-done for the most part, so it gives you a chance to stamp along with me. So this piece of cardstock is 4 inches wide by 5 1/4. And so we'll just emboss that quickly off screen with our Tasteful Textile folder. I do my die cutting off camera. That way it doesn't shake the table. So I actually step over to a different table to do that. So now I'm just going to grab my crumb cake card base, which I seem to have left over there as well. So this is just going to go with a flat adhesive right in the center of our card front. It's my go-to card size. If any of you follow Kylie Bertucci, she does something called Love It, Chop It. And this is one of those measurements that she gives for really getting the most out of your cardstock and designer series paper and just using up your stash. It's a nice, relaxing Friday afternoon here, so I hope you are relaxing and stamping. Tone-on-tone stamping is great joy. You absolutely could run this through the embossing folder as well if you didn't want to do the tone-on-tone, something just to give it a little bit of interest there. But you can use designer series paper or cardstock. This card layout has lots and lots of possibilities. Thank you, Joyce. I'm so glad you like them. Okay, so now we have our card base ready to start adding our layers. The first thing I'm going to do is put this scalloped rectangle on my card front over toward the left a bit, but centered from top to bottom. And I'll put that on with Stampin' Dimensionals. Just add a couple of the big ones here on the back. I'll be using the mini ones for some of the sentiments as well. So if you have both sizes, you'll want to keep both of them handy for this card. Actually, I'm going to move this out of the way now because it's driving me a little crazy there. Okay, so now we'll put our square down, and this is going to go over toward the right more, so it's not centered on your card front either, but we'll leave about the same little margin there of white that we did on the left. So we'll actually, with this one, we'll put dimensionals behind this side, but we don't want to put dimensionals behind this side because this one is already popped up. So we'll just add a little bit of liquid glue there. And bring in some more of those big dimensionals. Just a couple over on the side will be enough to pop it up there. Here. Okay, so our next little bit that we have to stamp is our plant pot. I'm actually going to stamp 2 of those because I know that on our last card we'll be using a plant pot just like this. So I'll pull in a scrap of my crumb cake. You can use whatever neutral you wanted. This would be great with gray granite or smoky slate. You could even do Cajun craze in there for a terracotta pot. I'm just using crumb cake because it was a nice neutral. And we'll just save a little bit of time by stamping 2 of them. And I'll just bring this off camera and die cut that. And if you're wondering which scalloped rectangle I used, I'm using I believe it's the largest or next to the largest from the Stitched So Sweetly dies. So now we have our plant pot, we have our aloe succulent, and we have our small green succulent. And these are the pieces that we're going to layer together to create our little focal point. So this one right here, I'm just going to adhere to the back side of my plant pot. I'm going to adhere it toward the right a little bit, and I'll just use a little bit of liquid adhesive to tack that in place. And now this one will go on the front of our plant pot. Actually, we're going to adhere it so that it's stuck right to the front of the plant pot, and it will look like it's kind of spilling out over the edge. And then we can put this with flat adhesive right here on our card front. And see how that kind of overlaps the side of the square? I think it just breaks up the lines a little bit to do it that way. This is just with flat adhesive on the back. We have that dimension behind our layers, so this really only needs flat adhesive. We'll be popping our sentiment up a little bit with mini Stampin' Dimensionals. All right, so I think right about there looks good. Now we'll add our sentiment. So this little label is a really cute shape. It has these little scallops on the side, and it has the stitching detail. This comes in the potted succulent dies as well. We'll stamp our sentiment with soft succulent or with whatever you chose for a medium green. I have not been cleaning my stamps while I've been stamping here, so I just need to grab my chamois. So who is stamping today with me? Let me know if you're stamping and if you're using the potted succulents and Simply Succulents, or if you're substituting a different set. So I have a scrap here of white. This is the thin basic white because we don't really need the thicker layer unless it's a card base. And because these are red rubber dies, it's not super easy to line them up. So what I'll do first is stamp and then die cut. If we were using photopolymer, we could easily just cut the die cut first and then stamp. But because we can't see through the red rubber, I find it's easier to stamp and then die cut. Oh, that makes me laugh, Jeannie. You love watching and listening. I hate listening to myself after the fact. I always listen to see if I've stumbled over my words or if I've said something that was not correct so that I can go back and make sure that I change it. But I hate listening to my own voice. I think everybody probably feels that same way. So this is our sentiment. It will go right here over the plant pot. So it won't be centered, but it will have a little bit of space over here, and we'll adhere that with mini Stampin' Dimensionals. 3 or 4 on the back will be the perfect amount. Lana, you are stamping with me with this set. Good, I'm glad. Lana was with me yesterday when we created this card using the new Home and Heart or Heart and Home Mega Suite, which is from our new mini catalog. So we did the same exact layout, but using a really big floral image, kind of it's probably about the same size as the succulents that we're using, that we use for our border, but we kept that floral image as the focal point. Okay, so we're going to tie a little bit of linen thread into a small bow, and then we'll tuck it right in next to our label with a glue dot. If you missed the otter cards, the otter projects the other night over on the public page, I was trying to tie a bow. I tried to tie a pretty bow from ribbon that was slightly too short. And the reason that I was trying to do it was because it was the very last of that ribbon that I had on my roll. I struggled so much, but I was determined to use that ribbon because it was the perfect match. So now I know I need to add that ribbon to my next order. All right, so we'll grab a mini glue dot, and I'm also going to grab my Take Your Pick tool, and I have the little pick point on there. And what I'll do is just pick off a mini glue dot. I'll tuck it right behind the knot of my linen thread bow. And then I'll take the point and I'm going to gently lift my label and just tuck that right in there so it'll nest perfectly right where that little scallop is, the little die cut scallop there. Okay, so we have our bow. And the last little bit to embellish this would be, we're going to add 3 of our classic matte dots. These are my new favorite embellishment. They are from the mini catalog. They are actually part of the Heart and Home suite. So if you're looking for that, they are right there with all of those pretty papers and embellishments. They are my gift with purchase this month. So anytime you place a $50 order or more, you get a full package of these as my thank you gift to you. And I've been using them on all of my online projects this month. So you'll have lots of different ways to use those classic matte dots. And I'm going to teach you a new way to kind of tweak them today. So we have our first card finished. It's a nice little note card, and I know exactly who I'm going to send this to. I don't think she's watching, but my librarian friend is on the mend right now, and she has been on my mind. So I'll be mailing one of these out to her very soon. So we have our first card done. Now we're going to get a little artsy on the next one. So this is where you'll probably get some inky fingers. I'm going to bring my entire Stamparatus in. Now, if you don't have a Stamparatus, it's okay. I'm actually not using it for its intended purpose today. I'm going to be using the magnets, though, to hold my background die or my background stencil in place. So before I do that, though, I need to cut my stencil. And let me show you what that is going to look like. I'm glad you like it, Dawn. Hello. So this is that big background stencil that comes in the potted succulents dies. This could be a little bit intimidating if you've never used one, but I promise I'm going to show you 2 different ways in this class that you can use it. And it uses very simple techniques and very simple tools. You do need to have the larger Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine for this. It's too wide to fit in the mini, so you do need to have the larger one. What I have here is just a 1/4 sheet of thin basic white, so just our regular basic white layers. And I'm going to just run that through my die cut machine. Now, I wanted it to be just a little bit bigger than the die, and then we'll trim it down for both of our cards. And so what we are left with, this is a time when that die brush would come in handy. And of course I left it in the other room. So I'm just going to pop these out off camera here, but it cuts perfectly. They all pop right out. So I'm just going to pop those out, and it's going to make kind of a little mess here. So we'll do that off camera. Sure, we don't have any messy crafters here, right? And we want to make sure that we get all of those little pieces out of the die, because we're going to be using it as a stencil on this first card. And we want to make sure that we have all of those little details popped out, because that will allow the ink to go in between and create the design. I'll bring that card back into focus too for you so that you can see that in just a minute. So if you are crafting along with me, you are going to be cutting this stencil using the potted succulents dies. And I absolutely should have taken the time to go in the other room and grab my die brush. All right, so I think I'm going to go do that. 30 seconds. Actually, it does give me a chance to show you how I use my die brush and how I store it. So I have these stacking bins. I got these at Rennie's or Walmart, but I have all of these that hold my basic tools that I use all the time. And usually I carry them to events, or I can carry them quickly from one room to another. But I keep this die brush. So I have my old die brush. This is the one that goes on my Take Your Pick tool. It comes with a foam insert, like a little foam rectangle. And when I use this, you can see that it does make quite a mess. So I'll put this back in here, and I'll show you how we use our die brush with our intricate dies. So the die brush fits right on the end of our Take Your Pick tools, and it's an optional tool. And you leave the die right on your paper, and then these little wire bristles will poke the part of the cardstock that you don't need, and it protects the stencil or the die that you do have. So I don't think these actually cut all the way when I put it through. So I think I'll run that through one more time. The beauty of crafting live with you is that you get my little oops. Because it's a detailed die, usually I will run it through forward and backward, and I tried to save a little bit of time today, and I only ran it through once, so I'm going to pull it through one more time. Oh, yeah, that is much better. And it is really easy to line this back up in the die as well. So that way you can go back if it didn't quite cut all the way through. So you can see we have all of those details there. All kinds of little scraps now. And then when we pop it out, we have this beautiful background die, this background die cut actually, and we're going to be using it in two different ways. The first card that we're going to create is going to be this one right here with this really soft stenciled background. I love this background. And then we'll use what we're using for a stencil on another card. So this is where I'm going to pull in that Stamparatus, and I'm only using it because it has those awesome, powerful magnets, and it's going to hold my cardstock and my stencil in place. So for this card, I'm using a card front size. It's a little, I think I cut it a little bit smaller than a card front, but we're going to be putting our die cut over the white cardstock. So this is just thin basic white. I'm going to put that here in my Stamparatus. And then I'm not actually going to put it up in the corner. I'm going to put it about 1/4 of an inch in, just so that way I can get the entire stenciled image on here. We'll cut it down after. So we'll just put that over the cardstock, and then I'm going to put it down with the magnet. So that's just going to hold it right in place there. By moving it in from the side each way, and I might even move it in a little bit more. By moving it in from the sides, I'll be able to go all the way to the edge with my ink colors. I'm going to start here in the center with my lightest color, which is my soft seafoam. If you haven't used blending brushes before, these are a really fun tool, and they are a tool that you can use again and again. I'll be using 3 today. They come in a pack of 3 for $12. And even though I'm using it with green ink today, I can wash this by rinsing it under the sink with just warm water. I don't use any soap for mine. I just rinse them with warm water and then put them in a mug or a mason jar to dry overnight. We used these last night in our Inky Fingers class for other colors, and I rinsed them and put them in a mug standing up to dry, and they were dry today. So they're a really useful tool. So I'm using first the soft seafoam, and I'm going to take my blending brush, and using a circular motion, I'm actually going to rub it right on my ink pad. I want to make sure that this is up far enough so that you can see it. That's what my computer helps me do as well. So pick up some ink by just scrubbing it in a circular motion on top of your ink pad. This is a really light color, so it will take a little bit of pressure and a few layers to get the color that we want. I'll actually move this back into focus as well. I usually start off the edge of my project, and using a circular motion, then I move on to my project. That way I don't end up with any globs of ink, like nothing too dark. And you can see that we're starting to get that soft color already. It's really important that the mask, the die cut that you're using, doesn't move, which is why those powerful magnets are awesome for this technique. The Stamparatus is in our annual catalog. However, they do have a really useful Stamparatus tote bag that protects your Stamparatus. It has little pockets inside for all of the plates and tools. That is actually on our clearance rack right now for $12. So it's retiring or retired. It's only available while supplies last, but it's less than half price because it was regular $29. I have had it for years, since the Stamparatus first came out, and I paid $29 for it. I think you should pay $12. It's a much better deal. So you can see I'm making kind of a stripe across the middle, and I'm going slightly more than 1/3 of the way. So it'll be like the middle third plus a little bit extra, because where the colors meet, I want to overlap them and blend them into each other so we have a soft gradient. No white spaces on this. So I'm going to set my soft sea foam aside now, and next I'll move on to my soft succulent. That's my medium green that I'll be using along the bottom. Now I'm going to carefully slide my magnet up onto the part that I've already inked. That will make sure that I don't move the stencil at all, and I'll be able to get the bottom part here. If you're just joining us, we are creating this beautiful variegated, like an ombre background using our potted succulents dies. Ooh, see, I've got a lot there. I didn't get that soft look that I wanted. It's okay, we will add a little bit more. I'll make sure that I'm starting off here on the edge and blending it. I re-inked my soft succulent right before the video today, so that's why it's very juicy. It's okay, it's still going to be a beautiful background. Maybe I'll just get a little bit more of the darker along the edge there, and then we trim this anyway, so I think it'll be all good. Don't those colors look so pretty together? Those are not colors that I would normally pair together, but on this theme of a card, you know, with the succulents, I just think that is so pretty together. And I'm slightly overlapping that soft sea foam and blending it to get a custom color there. I just want to soften some of these brush strokes there. So that means my color will be a little bit darker, but I will be blending to try to get rid of the brush strokes. I actually think I'm going to love this. We'll have a slightly darker sample than the first. I can't wait to take this stencil off and see what this looks like. Okay. We'll go up a little bit higher to blend slightly. And then we'll move on to our last color. So our last color that we're using today is Highland Heather, but you could use any light purple or light pink color. My favorite succulents always have that green and purple together. So just like I did before, I'll slide my magnets down onto the part that I've already inked. And we'll use Highland Heather. If you've ever placed an order with me and gotten one of my business cards or one of the thank you cards, the postcards, you'll know how much I love succulents. They are actually the theme on all of my thank you cards and business cards and vouchers, my customer and team vouchers. I absolutely love succulents. They are about the only plant that I don't kill instantly. It takes me a while to kill them. When I moved into the house where I live now, I had a couple of tiny little potted succulents that I had gotten years ago at Boynton's greenhouse. And when I got them, they were in the little tiny 2-inch pots. One of them was a tall, I don't know what it was. It wasn't a jade, but it got to be like a foot tall. I had to put it in a couple of different pots over the years, but it started out as a little 2-inch plant pot, and that thing had a mind of its own. And eventually, like all of my plants, it decided to leave us. I agree, Leslie. I like, it's cool to see the different tones. So we have our very soft one, which is our original, and then we'll see what this one looks like. We'll have our grand reveal. Slide these off, the magnets off. Oops, that's exactly what you're not supposed to do with the magnets. Ready? Here we go. Look how beautiful that is. And then we'll be using this part for one of our third card, actually. But this is what we're going to use on our second card. Isn't that gorgeous? I love it. Okay, so I'm actually going to use my Stampin' Chamois to just wipe this down. So this is an optional product in the catalog. This is, gosh, it's only a couple of dollars, but it's a little foam mat that fits in your Stamparatus, and it has this plastic grid coating on it. I use this all the time because you can just wipe it down and be good to go. It also gives you that little cushion. So if you need a little cushion to stamp on, if you're using your photopolymer stamps, it works perfectly. Just the right thickness. Okay, so we'll move this out of the way. And I said that we were going to trim this down a little bit. So we're going to trim this stenciled layer down to 3 3/4 wide by 5 inches long. There's a little bit of a white edge there, so I'm going to trim it a little bit wider, and then I'll cut off both sides. So that way I don't have any white, pure white edges. Gosh, I love that. Look at how rich that color is. I do too, Kathy. They are so much fun. I need to pull in my other trimmer, my bigger trimmer. My little chopper is my favorite trimmer for small jobs, but sometimes we need the bigger trimmer. We need to get the big guns out, so we'll trim this to 5. And now we can start building our card base. So I'm using a soft succulent card base. I almost think that I would like to go with, gosh, that would look so pretty on, and I don't have one out here because that's not what I was going to use. It's fine, we'll use soft succulent. I think I'd like that on our evening evergreen. That would be beautiful, but we'll use soft succulent. I think it'll still, yeah, it still looks great. Okay, so we have our next layer, which is a crumb cake layer. This is 4 by 5 1/4. And then we have our regular size card base. So we'll center both of those layers right on the front of our card. Thank you, Lisa. It is pretty. And look at what a different look, right? Just because I got a little heavy-handed. But look at that. I don't know if you can see far away, but look at that detail on there. It gives it such depth, doesn't it? Pretty, pretty. We have a few dies that you could use this technique with. We also have several packs of masks that are designed for this technique. So whether you're creating your own or using a pre-made mask, you can do this technique, which leads me to one of the tips. I said that if you were not using this bundle, I would give you some tips, and you can also create your own mask using smaller die cuts. So you could create a mask using smaller dies and just repeatedly cut them out of that cardstock. So you could do leaves and create your own leaf background. Anything that has a detail to it. You could even use punched shapes. You could do a punched border. So we have our card base done. The stamping on this is just the sentiment, but we have some of these pretty die cuts here. So these are standalone die cuts, meaning they don't cut out an image. You would just use them to supplement or just add interest to your card. So we have this one right here. My friend Ginny X sent me a Christmas card where she used this as the Grinch's hand. So she cut it out of granny apple green and it was holding a Christmas ornament. It was the cutest thing. It hung on my tree while I have my tree here. So I'm using 3 different dies. We'll call it the Grinch hand. We're using the Grinch hand. We're using this one that looks like these small little bulbs on there. And then we have a really detailed succulent die that we're going to cut from Highland Heather. So this little one right here, we'll cut all of those little outlines. Highland Heather, soft seafoam, and soft succulent. So if you're crafting along with me, you can grab those colors. Part of me wants to ink up the edges of these die cuts today while I have you here on the camera with me. What do you think? Should I add some color, some ink to the edges of those with the blending brushes, or should I leave them like the original? You can let me know in the comments. Blending brushes, or just leave well enough alone? I think I'm going to add a little bit of color, at least to my greens, because the greens seem a little bit light compared to our richer blended background. I think that I want to add a little bit, especially to this one. See how that looks kind of washed out there? I think if we add a little bit of color on there, it will just make it pop a little bit more. And the same with our Grinch hand. That one I think needs a little bit of color too. I agree, Leslie. Let's put some color on those. So I'm just going to bring in my Stamparatus again, just because it has that nice foam layer, which is super easy to clean. All right, let's see, soft succulent for this one. Now with this one, it's going to be a little tricky because this is kind of delicate there. It's only attached down here. So I think I will actually bring in one of those magnets, just one, and hold down the base there. And then just do a little bit of a blend. Kind of brushing a little bit of that ink on there to get it just a little darker. look at that, how that just kind of, oh yes, I like that a lot. Good choice. Okay, we'll bring in the soft seafoam now and do the same thing with our little Grinch hand. Now, this bottom part is going to be covered up anyway. It will be covered up with our label, so I don't need to worry about inking the bottom. So pretty. And it just adds a little bit of interest. And it took us, what, 20 seconds? Such a quick fix. And I don't think we need any on this one. That one is just so fine. I don't think that we would even notice it on that one. So I'm going to make a little cluster, a little grouping here that's kind of to the left, and I want it to overlap so it's not quite so linear. So I'm going to put this one towards the back. I'll just kind of use my sample to guide. And I'm just going to put this down with liquid adhesive, just a little bit behind the bottom. When we put our sentiment on, we'll add some dimensionals there, and that will also help to hold these in place. And then I don't know what kind of succulent this is, but this one will go next. Just kind of layering it over there. And I think I'll just line it up there with the way those are curved. And then with this one right here, I'll just add a little bit of adhesive on the bottom here. I won't worry too much if it shows because it will be covered up with our label. We'll just press that down. All right, and now we will stamp our sentiment and die cut that. So I'm stamping You Make the Ordinary Extraordinary. That is from the Simply Succulents. And it also fits perfectly in this really pretty stitched label die. This comes with the Potted Succulents dies, and it fits perfectly in there. It also comes with Kind People Are My Kind of People. And if you know me, you know that I love that phrase. And also a thanks. We're not using thanks today, but I'm using the other three. So now we'll just grab a scrap of white, just thin basic white. And our Highland Heather ink. Just run over to my next table and cut that out with the stitched label die. Now the bow on this one is just made from 2 strands of linen thread, and we'll attach those before we put our sentiment on. I think I actually put did I put my cluster lower? No, I think that looks right. I always second guess myself, especially when I'm on camera. All right, so we'll use 2 strands. Let's see, I think I probably need about that much. That's my exact measurement, about that much. My mom was a crafter. She mostly sewed and made cakes, but she did get into card making later in life. And I remember when she was measuring things, she'd say, oh, about yay big. Such an exact measurement, right? So about yay. 2 yay, double yay, because we've got 2 strands of our linen thread here. And about halfway in the middle, I'm going to make a loop and start tying my bow. Now, as I tie this bow, I'm going to gauge if I have enough to make my loops as big as I want them. So this tail on this side is much bigger. So that tells me that I just need to move further in toward the side that had too big of a tail. I know that I want a big loopy bow though. So by doing it this way, you can keep trying different lengths until you get the size bow that you want. And I want my bow to be about 4 inches wide with the loops, because the loops are the important part here. The tails, yeah, those are kind of important, but not as much as the loop. It's really the loopiness that I like on this. And then I'll just pull 1 tail on each side, and that will separate my loops a little bit. So it looks kind of busy, but it's going to be smooshed down a little bit behind our label. So I'll just grab a glue dot and put it behind the knot. And I'm going to glue dot this right to my card base, right about where those succulents start. So right about there. We'll make sure that our tails are pointing down toward the bottom as much as possible. It is pretty loopy and curly. And then I'll add some Stampin' Dimensionals here and stick this right over the top, and that will help tame our bow. And then once we have that stuck down, then we can start kind of manipulating our loops in our bow the way we want it to look when it's finished. And we'll snip off the tails. I'm glad you like it, Joy. Sometimes I just do single bows, and I did that on 2 of the cards, but with this one, I really wanted just something a little bit more. This is kind of a little bit of an artsy card. We did that pretty artsy background, and I just think the double bow looks good with it. And we can tuck that down and kind of manipulate it how we want. And then we have our little cluster of succulents and twine there. So super pretty card. And we're done with our second one. So you have the softer tones and then the darker, richer tones. And we'll pretend that I did that on purpose. But I do love the way it turned out, don't you? I'm not sure which one I like more. I almost think that I like this one better. They just have a different look to them, so no need to pick a favorite. We like them both. So we'll set our second card aside, and then we'll move on to our final card. So our final card here is going to use that die that we used as a stencil. Remember, we had just set it aside. So when I cut this, I cut it from a 1/4 sheet of basic white, which leaves more of a border around the sides than it does from top to bottom. So I'm just going to pull in my little chopper, my little paper trimmer, so that way I can trim off the sides so that we have more of an even border around all 4 sides. This one I think just needs to be straightened a bit. I think that one is a little bit off. And remember, that was just from where we ran it through the die cut machine. So it was not perfectly straight when I put it in there. So we're just kind of eyeballing it. I think we did a pretty good job. But now that we're using this on our card front, we do want to make sure that all of our edges are nice and straight and that they have a 90-degree angle. I know it's hard to see on this background paper, but what we have is this really pretty ombre inked background. Look at how pretty that is when we layer it over white cardstock. So this is a thick basic white card base. And now I'm going to flip it over. Look at the difference. So it's hard to believe that started with white cardstock. Now we're going to be putting some different things on the front of our card here that will help to hold down this intricate die. I didn't put in an adhesive sheet on the back because we are just going to use a few little dots of glue. If we had put the adhesive sheet on the back, it wouldn't have been as easy to use as a stencil. I mean, we still could have done it. We just would have had to be very careful that the backing didn't peel off. So I'll just use some little dots of glue in the four corners, and then I'll probably put a little dot midway down each side as well. And then we'll use lots of things on the front with dimensionals that will help hold it down even more. Little tiny dots of liquid glue is all we need for this. I actually have some room there. I'll put a little bit in the center of those sides as well. Make sure that I have my card opening the right way. Now, one thing that I noticed when I used this is that the die is not the same proportions as an A2 card base. So you end up with a little bit wider border on each side. But I tried it a couple of different ways and I found that I liked it better having the outside border of the stencil be the same width all the way around. I thought that was less noticeable than having the sides be the same, the same margins. All right. Oh, I really like that. See, with this one right here, I used the purple, the Highland Heather, but it blended in. I know why too, because on this one, I had tried it with soft seafoam instead of basic white. That was the difference with this one. And so up here, when I blended that Highland Heather in, it looks more like the crumb cake, doesn't it? So this one will have a completely different look as well because I used basic white as my mask. Forgot about that. All kinds of different variations for you today. Now for this one, we're making a little tone-on-tone tail. This piece is 1 1/4 by, 1 1/4 by 2 1/2. So it's going to be a little banner at the top. We're going to stamp our succulent. So we're using this succulent right here. This one is it has a coordinating die. So you could cut it out. We're just going to use it for that tone-on-tone stamping though. We won't be die cutting that. So I'll do a couple of the larger ones. And then I'll go in and I'll fill in those little spots, those little empty spots with the smaller of the two. So this is the one that we used on the first card that we used with the soft seafoam, but this time I'll use it with soft succulent and just fill in kind of those little areas that need a little filling. And remember to rotate your stamp each time you stamp. That way it doesn't have a striped effect. We want it to look completely random. Perfectly random, right? The center will be covered up for the most part with our sentiment label. Now I'll pull in my tailored tag punch. If you have stamped with me before, you know that I love my tailored tag punch for creating notches for the ends of my banner. So I'm just going to slide it in the top, and I'll center my strip from left to right and just punch out that little triangle shape for a perfect banner. This will go right up here all the way to the top of our card. So we'll probably put it in about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and this will go down with flat adhesive. So I'm just using my multi-purpose liquid glue, my Tombow. Has a little bit of ink on the back because the Stamparatus, when I stamped off the edge, has that on there. So unlike grid paper, this doesn't absorb it. So you just have to be a little bit careful if you are stamping on there, because it will transfer the ink to your project if you're not careful. It's on the back, so it doesn't matter for the banner. Okay. Now we already stamped our plant pot and die cut that back when we did our first card. But what we haven't done now is created this ombre look for the stamped and die cut succulents. So we're going to pull in just a scrap piece of soft seafoam, and we'll add some soft seafoam ink to that. Now this just needs to be big enough to accommodate this large stamp that we're going to use. Okay, so we'll just cut a scrap over here. Ooh, just made it. I hope I made it. Let's see. Did I cut that too small? No, perfect. So we're going to add some ink with our blending brushes. We're going to add more toward the bottom, and we're eventually going to taper off until we don't have any at the top. And we may even add in some of the soft succulent. I'm not sure if we're going to need it yet. I can't remember if I used both colors or just one for this. I'm glad you like it, Glenda. How are you feeling, by the way? Hopefully on the mend. We've got a lot of people that are watching that I've been thinking about lately and hoping you are all on the mend. Okay, so on my laptop, it says that the live video has ended. Can you give me a thumbs up or a like or a heart if you can still hear me? I can see it on my phone, so I hope that you're still with me. Give me a heart or a like with a thumbs up if you can hear and see. Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's just my computer. Just my computer that doesn't want to play my video. So I'm not sure that I'll be able to keep up with questions or comments if I'm just using my phone because that's where my camera is. So I will try. Oh yes, we definitely used the soft succulent as well, but I'm still building this color. Remember that when I start with my blending brush, I start off my cardstock and work my way up until eventually I don't have any ink or very little ink left on my blending brush. And I'm really concentrating it down toward the bottom. And I'm going to pull in that soft succulent now and get my other blending brush. And remember, we're stamping and die cutting on this. We're just kind of building our own little ombre cardstock first. So we still have stamping and die cutting to do. So this will look very different once we have done that. All those different colors of greens, which is exactly how succulents are. They are just a mix of every possible green and bluish green and yellowish green out there. Now we're ready to stamp that large succulent. We'll use our soft succulent to make sure that it shows up on all areas. And let's see, so I really don't know if all succulents are like this, but I do know that these tall ones, when I had real ones, those were the lightest color. Those were like a really pale, almost exactly that color. And then I had some of these others that had all of the little spikes on them. Those were the darker ones. So I want to focus my stamping in that same way. So I see these that have all of the more concentrated spines. I want that down here where the darker color is. This tall one here, that one I'm going to have up here in this corner where it's lighter. So I'm just twisting it so that way I get all of my image on my inked cardstock, and then we'll die cut it. I'm so glad you like them, Joy. I absolutely love stamping. It's my favorite hobby. Look how pretty that is. One thing about the blending brushes is you never really know what it's going to look like until it's finished, and it would be very difficult to have two look exactly the same. All right, so we will take this over to the die cut machine and die cut that with the outline. Remember, this die set comes with the details, but it also comes with these outlines that will cut out your stamped images. No fussy cutting. Now this one looks even different from my sample because I added more of the color there on the bottom. Look at the difference there, just so much richer. But it works out perfectly because this background is a much richer color. All right, so let's grab our other plant pot. I thought I die cut the first time when I went over, but I guess I only die cut one. So we'll die cut that second one. And this time we're making a full plant pot full of succulents. So this will go in the corner here. And then our succulents will go on top. And see the difference between those two greens? It's just such a nice mix. They all work because they all are in that background. So what we'll do is we'll attach this first with just liquid glue along the top rim, and we'll put that on there. And then we'll use Stampin' Dimensionals to pop all of this up on our card front. I'm glad you like the blending. I'm always a little bit nervous, you know, when I do things that are kind of messy, you know, because I'm like, oh, are they going to want just, you know, quick and simple cards today? But these are just fun. They may not be super quick, but they are fun. And honestly, we are right on time. We always do 90 minutes for our classes. We still have 6 minutes to spare. We have just a bit of stamping left. So we'll pop this up with some of our regular size Stampin' Dimensionals. I'll make sure my plant pot is not floating. We want that so it looks like it's kind of sitting down on the bottom. And then we'll add a tiny bow from linen thread. So we did our big loopy bow on the last one. This one will just be a regular, normal, one strand bow. And we'll just adhere that right to our plant pot with a mini glue dot. All right, we have just one thing left, and I'm also going to show you how we made these dots as well, because I used only white dot. Oh, I forgot the white dots on my last card. They kind of blended in on my sample, so we'll add some of those after the fact. But I'm going to stamp my sentiment on a scrap of basic white with soft succulent ink. And then I'm going to add some of our classic matte dots. These are our new matte dots, but if you remember, they only come in white, very vanilla, basic gray, and basic black. So we're going to alter some. We can't leave well enough alone, right? We have to always change it up. Mostly because the white ones really wouldn't show up much on this, and none of the other colors would match. So we needed to do something to make them work. And one of the things that I love about white embellishments is that we can always switch that up. This ink pad is super juicy. I'm a little bit nervous that this is going to be too juicy. We may have to grab a spoon and push the ink down in. No, actually that came out perfectly. So now that we have it stamped, we're going to die cut it using another one of the label dies that comes in this set. So this die set really is like an all-inclusive set. It has everything that you need to create all of these cards. The only thing that was not part of it was the scalloped rectangle that I used on the very first card. So this is the label that we're going to use to cut out this sentiment. I love that it has the stitching on it as well. This will be popped up with Stampin' Dimensionals. Stampin' Dimensional backs everywhere. Okay, so now we need to add some of these little soft succulent gems. But remember, we don't actually carry soft succulent matte gems. So what I'm going to do is take 3 of the white classic matte dots, and then I'm going to pull in my soft succulent Stampin' Blends. I'm going to actually use the dark soft succulent. And I don't use the brush tip for coloring in my images. I use the bullet tip, but I am going to use the brush tip to color my matte dots. I'm just using this to hold it in place. And I'll just use my Stampin' Blends marker to color that. Now, while it's wet, it's going to look a little bit blotchy. You just want to make sure that you don't stop coloring on the top of it, because that will leave a little dot of, see if I do that. I don't know if you can see that, but it leaves a little dot of ink there. We just want to make sure that when we are done coloring, we take the brush tip and kind of swirl it around to the bottom, and that will make sure that we don't have a glob of ink left on the top that's visible. So we'll do that with all of our white classic dots. And then when they dry, you're going to get this really soft, perfectly matched color. And it's going to have a matte finish. Right now, it looks like it has a shiny finish or a glossy finish because the ink, the alcohol ink, is still wet. But as it dries, it's going to keep that matte finish that the classic matte dots have. So it just takes a few seconds for that to dry. And then we'll use our Take Your Pick tool to pick those up off the clear backing and add them to our sentiment label. So I'll add one small one and then a small and a large over here. Here, the adhesives showing a bit on that one. There. And now we have our third card finished. Again, this one has richer colors because of we used basic white instead of soft seafoam for the mask, but also we used a lot more ink when we used the blending brushes, so we get a very different look using the same colors, but just by switching up things a little bit. So we have our third card finished. So we'll bring all of those back in. Some of you are just joining us. We just finished 3 cards together. So we have our first one here, which is a simple note card where we use that large cluster of succulents as a border stamp. Then we used our large die cut to create a mask, and we masked a background using blending brushes. So we had our very pastel sample, and then this one, I got a little heavy-handed with that soft succulent, so we ended up with a much richer color, but just beautiful. And then finally, we used that mask that we created and we used it as our background actually on this card. So 3 completely different ones. I love them too. And you know what? You'll never get the same look twice. So it just gives you lots of variety. Well, this week I'm continuing my daffodil ordering special. So if you joined me last Friday for the Daffodil Daydream class, I'm still using that host code, and orders of $35 or more earn the 3 daffodil card kits, and you can go back and watch that replay at any time. And you have to use the host code that's associated with that. It's my current host code that you'll find anywhere on the Facebook page or here in the online card class group. Also, any orders of $50 or more get a full package of the classic matte dots that I've been using on all of my projects this month. I will show you this one, how they blend in a little bit, but they just give that just a little finished look. So we used just white today. I hope you enjoyed this class. We are so close on time. We only ran over by 4 minutes, which was pretty amazing considering all the techniques that we did. And I'm so glad that you joined me at this later time today. Thank you for being so understanding. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.